Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. I'm Randy Wright, and I'll be your captain on this solo flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program. Folks, this will be the final boarding call, so if you please, claim your seats, fasten your seatbelts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show while I go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist, as there really is a lot of news and information to get to before I may fully indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, folks, one of the things that we've seen come to the epicenter time and again is with respect to Donald Trump and the way that he's been handling everything. It's really rather bizarre, all that has been going on with respect to Bill O'Reilly in particular, and I know that we've brought this up on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer. And you see, what has happened in the wake of that disastrous debacle and fiasco known as the 2016 presidential election cycle is the fact that we are losing a sense or even a recognition of common decency. All of those strains of virtue that sagacious founding father Samuel Adams said was a prerequisite for our nation to retain its ability to be a strong, vibrant, and dare I say, robust republic. And unfortunately, that is something that shows no signs of improving within the foreseeable future. And it's something that we have been harping on here, folks, for the past approximate 2 years. It's something that shows no signs of improving within the foreseeable future. And one of the things that has come up to the surface again with respect to the Fox News network was we all know that 2016 had marred that network with the now late Roger Ailes' alleged sexual misconduct that the news channel and News Corporation, the parent company of the Fox News channel, was forced to settle early on. But Bill O'Reilly got snared in that. And it all centered around this notion of the basically your sponsors being able to control the message. After all, this is a business. That is what they were aiming for. The profit and the bottom dollar is their primary impetus and what their modus operandi focuses around. That is to be expected within a model system like this. But the thing that keeps coming to the surface with all of this is that there has been these claims, whether it be by the Fox News channel's Sean Hannity, or now by Bill O'Reilly himself, that there has been this orchestrated effort which has been propagated and fronted by the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists to essentially wipe out those voices in our information media sources and outlets once and for all. And of course, that is something that is not hard to believe. We have discussed it time and again on previous episodes of our state-of-the-art radio program, how the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists cannot stand any form of dissent, anything that doesn't march lockstep with their own dark, twisted ideology and machinations, as well as their propagandist narrative and agenda. But the problem is we're seeing that both sides are essentially engaging in this sort of misconduct. Both sides are pushing a narrative and an ulterior motive. I know that that was one of the things that I hit upon on my last solo flight special edition of the Wright Flyer, and it bears repeating again here, because it is something that is becoming an undeniable pattern, a repetitive thing that we have seen repeat itself over and over again, reaching the point of ad nauseum. And so it's important that we, in our capacity as United States citizens, keep as an objective and open a mind to all of this as possible, and that we begin rooting out the truth for ourselves. Because as my first officer, Jeremy Grapington, has oftentimes said, that the truth always has a way of shining through. It can always pierce, its light, that is, can always pierce the veil of falsity, the veil of subterfuge. And make no mistake about it, folks, the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media are engaged in peddling subterfuge in an attempt to obfuscate the truth, to bamboozle the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours, we the people. That has been their goal since the turn of the 20th century and the rise of the newspaper conglomerate of one William Randolph Hearst. And the reason that this keeps coming to the surface is that we do have nefarious forces like George Soros attempting to control the narrative, attempting to create a perception, and recall that in the arena of American politics, perception, even if it is an erroneous one, oftentimes matters more than reality itself. You see, this is the harsh reality and the cold set of facts that we must awaken to. We must be ready, willing, and able to hold the media pundits accountable for their words, deeds, and actions, just as we would our elected officials, just as we would each other, just as we would for ourselves. You see, that harkens back to something that we have reiterated here at the Wright Flyer, dating back to our premiere episode, which aired on September 11th of 2015, that the two fundamental pillars of American society, of our national heritage, character, spirit, but above all identity, are those of self-accountability and self-responsibility working in tandem, thereby giving us self-determination. You see, we must be a self-determinate people, and that's certainly something that the Fox News Channel, throughout its 22-some-odd years of being a cable news channel, would allude to with their slogan. We report, you decide, fair and balanced. Again, what it's speaking to is a notion of objectivity, but it's not something that I believe they live up to. Certainly, throughout the course of that disastrous debacle and fiasco known as the 2016 presidential election cycle, they picked their favorites. Remember, at first, it was the amnesty-loving Gang of Eight, Narco Rube EIEIO, but that was after, of course, El Jefe Jeb Bush fell out. But then they went to the mafioso quafioso, the 45th president of these United States, Donald J. Trump. And again, I have to reiterate, folks, that we do not wish for the president to fail, because that would be wishing for the entire nation to fail, and that is the last thing that any decent, hardworking, red-blooded American citizen would ever want to have happen. We've had enough of these nefarious and twisted efforts to undermine the body politique of the land of the free and the home of the brave. It's time that we get back to a modicum of sanity within the arena of American politics and within the manner and method in which this is covered. But unfortunately, that is certainly not what the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media wish to accomplish. Because at least for the past half-century, they have been doubling down on their efforts to continue to peddle a very specific narrative, one that truly has no place in an open, honest, but above all free society like that of the United States. So when we realize what it is that is happening on a grand scale, examining the totality of the circumstances and under a modicum of objectivity, we begin to see that there is a pattern, that the steps that are being taken basically push this one step beyond even the whole notion of a adversarial system. I know that we have mentioned that before, that the American system of polity is an adversarial system. It has been throughout the course of our history. Recall that one of the most heated and contested presidential election cycles in our nation's relatively brief yet illustrious history here on the face of God's green earth was the election of 1800 between our second president, John Adams, and our third president, Thomas Jefferson. In fact, it was so heated, so contentious, so downright vicious that it was referred to as the Revolution of 1800. This was because the Federalist Party, that party which was seeking to exponentially expand the scope, breadth, power, influence, and control of the federal government, essentially adopting the overarching governmental scheme of Alexander Hamilton, were trying to besmirch Jefferson. This was after they had pushed for the Alien Sedition Act, which sought to criminalize speaking out against one's government. But when we look at the Bill of Rights, or the first 10 amendments to our shared United States Constitution, we see that that is just completely against the original vision that our founding fathers had for this nation at the time of its conception, some 237 plus years ago. And in their infinite wisdom and foresight, as well as their sagacity, we see that they have handed us the longest lasting or longest standing constitutional republic in the entire course of human events. Again, this is something that doesn't really get talked about. It's certainly not taught in the ivory towers of academia from coast to coast and border to border in this, our beloved republic. Again, because the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists have an ulterior motive and a propagandist narrative and agenda here, and they are not about to back away from that. They believe that they see a light at the end of the tunnel, and that means that their victory is within grasp. And in some ways, this incremental push that they have, inching this nation ever further to the left in an incessant fashion, has had some success. Now, I'm not one that would go forth and proclaim that the once strong man type anchor and face of the Fox News channel in Bill O'Reilly, with his show being the highest grossing one there, the O'Reilly Factor, back when he was there, as a conservative. Sure, he would have those culture warrior segments, but the man himself did not live up to his morality. And again, drawing our attention back to the fact that Sam Adams said that in order for the United States to be a strong, vibrant, and dare I say, robust republic, we would have to be a virtuous people, a people of a high standard of morality. Well, the philandering ways of O'Reilly, and the fact that he had multiple cases of sexual harassment allegations brought against him over the course of the past several decades, one of the first being by his female producer, Andrea Macries, there is a course of conduct there that is repetitive and undeniable. But of course, I am not going to go out and say that that necessarily means that his voice should be deprived. We do still afford constitutional protections to scoundrels. For you see, the whole adage of the United States being a nation of laws and not of men really applies here. Equal protection and due process under the law, as found in the 5th and 14th Amendments to our shared United States Constitution, are absolutely imperative. And we cannot selectively enforce or apply the law, otherwise we undermine everything that we hold near and dear here in the land of the free and the home of the brave. Now, I understand that there is this attempt to silence them, but remember, it is those that are hearkening for a type of tyranny, despotism, and authoritarianism that are utilizing those arrows from their quiver of arrows. They are the ones that will stop at nothing to attempt to silence anyone who disagrees with them. And again, this is because they realize that their dark and twisted machinations simply cannot compete in the free marketplace of ideas. This is because the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists are pushing for a system that would be theft by any other name. So why in our right mind would we sit there and champion these things, no matter how odious a person is? The way it should be controlled is by the free market, and sure, yes, the sponsors are a way of expressing the free market. But when you have conglomerates, and when you have these companies that no longer carry the interests of the United States at heart, then you've got a problem. Not so much a problem. I know Jeremy prefers to refer to it as an issue, where he states that a problem is something that lacks a solution. And certainly there is a solution to this cornucopia of ridiculousness that we have seen come to the surface in the past several successive decades. But you see, the main issue here is that those twin cancerous doctrines of political correctness and moral relativism have come into such a way that character assassination, whether it's warranted or not, is being utilized to strip and deprive people of the ability to earn a living, the ability to make a name for themselves. And I'm sorry, but I do not believe that that is the way that these United States of America were meant to operate. If that is the case, then why do we even have the Bill of Rights or the first 10 amendments to our shared United States Constitution? And if we recall, the reason that I am placing such emphasis on this is that Article 5 of the Constitution states in no uncertain terms that any of the amendments which were ratified are to be construed as though they were originally part of the Constitution during the time of its drafting and ultimate ratification. You see, that speaks to the damn near infinite wisdom, foresight, and dare I say sagacity of our founding fathers when they sat down at the Philadelphia Convention of 1787 to hammer out the problems that were found in the Articles of Confederation. You see, the Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union really did not address the issues that were facing the nation. It did not allow the nation the ability to move forward in a cohesive fashion, but at the same time, it didn't afford enough protections to the individual rights of the popular sovereigns. Again, this is part of the reason why my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, our first Air Marshal, Mr. Nelson Ward, and indeed yours truly, have so oft times reiterated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, that it is such a horrific thing to basically refer to the United States as a direct democracy or as a democracy in this loose-knit fashion. You see, that is purposefully obfuscating the truth in an attempt to bamboozle the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours in order to make them think it's okay to have a democracy. But remember that outspoken founding father, Benjamin Franklin, defined a democracy best when he defined it as two wolves and a lamb voting for what's for lunch. The lamb is going to lose each and every time, falling victim to what is known as a tyranny of the majority. Granted, I know I have repeated this on past episodes to the point of it reaching ad nauseum, but again, it is so on point that it bears repeating here. You see, the United States is, and has always been, a representative republic. A republic is something that recognizes the rights of the individual popular sovereign. It's designed to protect us from both a tyranny of the majority and a tyranny of the minority. But when we have these businesses, these so-called sponsors, attempting to wield influence over our information media sources and outlets, pushing the twin cancerous doctrines, which we have declared total war upon here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, those of political correctness and moral relativism, you see that there is an attempt to essentially prevent the American people from being able to think for themselves or to be self-determinate. Yes, should Bill O'Reilly be held accountable for his misdeeds? Absolutely. But I'm not so sure that the way that it's been unfurling is one that operates in the best interests of the American people. I'm not sure that what we have seen come to the limelight is in line with all that we do hold near and dear, both as a nation and people. When we keep these things in mind, And when the proper context is applied, then it begins to make sense as to what's happening. Now, I know that one of the things that we've said with respect to the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media is that they are peddling a biased agenda. This has been one of the calling cards of the American right for generation after successive generation now, and again, it shows no signs of improving within the foreseeable future. No one is denying, except for those that are intellectually disingenuous anyway, that there is a leftist slant or bias within America's mainstream media. The left has dominated it, certainly with the emergence of the television news cycles, all the way back to the time of Walter Cronkite in the 1950s and 60s. And recall that this was at the same time that great visionary Zygmunt Dobbs, in his magnum opus of Keynes at Harvard, was attempting to warn the American people that these frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists were infiltrating the fundamental pillars of our society. And again, this makes sense when we consider that the Fabian society traces its origins back to 19th century Great Britain, where they had assumed the original iconography of that as a wolf in sheep's clothing, meaning that they had nefarious deeds, that they had ulterior motives, and that they wanted to infiltrate, pervert, and corrupt the upper crust of polite society. And the reason that I place such emphasis on the term polite society is, have you noticed? One of the things that we've decried here time and again is this sudden lack and lapse of civil discourse. Folks, our nation would have never been developed, and we would have never become the people that we are today without the ability of civil discourse. Our bicameral legislature was created on an entire notion of civil discourse. It was based upon what was known as the Great Compromise. Does anybody even know that there is an overarching good, a greater good in this republic of ours? I don't think so. I think that we have allowed these agent provocateurs of tyranny, despotism, but above all oppression to control the narrative, to bamboozle the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in these United States, we the people. And this is something that has been continuing without any end in sight. But when you have both sides of the political aisle engaging in gotcha politics instead of standing up for lofty political ideals and philosophies, when we reduce our system of polity to an endless slew of bumper stickers, slogans, and platitudes, this is the end result each and every time, and it works to the great detriment of the American people each and every time. We have to be stalwart and vigilant when it comes to standing up for our rights. And again, I'm reminded of that French philosopher and admirer of America during her halcyon days, Alexis de Tocqueville. When he spoke of the ills of a free press, he said that in Europe, the type of free press that existed within the heart of the United States of America would never be tolerated. The monarchies, or the fledgling republics, would not tolerate it because they didn't have the history or the tradition of a free press. Essentially, they feared that this would foment revolution. However, in the United States, you had these pamphlets and papers that were largely unrestricted and unregulated, spouting off some diatribe that could oftentimes be referred to as sensational, but the American people paid no attention to it other than for what it was, because at that time there was a particular bent, a particular bias, but it was admitted to by the pamphlet. They made no bones about what they were preaching, the message that they were conveying to the American public. There was not any of this faux objectivity. That was started when the influence of William Randolph Hearst came to its pinnacle during the opening decades of the 20th century. Recall that that movie, Citizen Kane, was actually based on the life of William Randolph Hearst and the way that he attempted to control politics and to influence public opinion. We know that he did it in 1898 with all of these sensationalized yellow journalist stories about trumped up atrocities committed by the Spanish Empire against the Cuban and Filipino people. But it's not something that's admitted now. Since the time of Vietnam, the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media have taken a blame America first stance. They always point the finger at the body politique of this, the longest standing representative republic, which is constitutionally endowed throughout the entire course of human events. That is their tried and true and very tiresome mantra. And yes, folks, they've been doing this for generation after successive generation now with no signs of it letting up. And so now we have reached a point where the Fox News channel in the mid-90s saw that there was a niche market because all of your alphabet soup networks, CNN, ABC, CBS, all of them, had a leftist slant. They were presenting the news with their pet bias, and damn the consequences. This is also why, throughout the disastrous 2 terms of the Barack Hussein Obama regime, we saw the push for the Internet Fairness Doctrine, attempting to force us to acquiesce to the dark and twisted machinations of these crazy things. And yes, it is something that cannot be ignored. It's something that has been reaching a pinnacle and has reached a point of dominating the media news cycle and the outlook that we have. And of course, is it any wonder then when they keep peddling this fake crap that people just tune out? Of course, the danger that arises out of that is we now start ignoring all the news, all negatives of our side, because again, one of the dangers that we've allowed come to fruition here in the heart of the land of the free and the home of the brave is simply allowing our system of polity to devolve into a mere spectator sporting event. And again, I'm going to bring up the warning that the father of our nation, George Washington, brought up in his 1796 farewell address. He implored the American people not to allow themselves to break down into disparate and competing factions because ultimately we would lose sight of that which truly matters. Our shared United States Constitution, which encapsulates and protects our fundamental and inalienable rights which were endowed to us by our Creator, who happens to be none other than the God of nature himself. Now, these dark and twisted, as well as nefarious forces that are attempting to unravel the societal fabric of the United States, they are the ones that want us to believe that the government is some sort of a, benevolent benefactor, when in fact nothing, and I mean truly nothing, could be further from the truth. This is the sort of chicanery that we have seen for generation after successive generation now. And the only way that we're going to be able to get past it is to really take matters into our own hands. Now, I'm not advocating violence or anything like that. I just mean that we read between the lines, that we do a bit of investigative research on our own in our capacity as United States citizens. Now, yes, I fully realize that we are all caught up in the facets of our daily lives in this fast-paced modern society in which we live today. That, too, was something that the great visionary Zygmunt Dobbs warned us of back in the 1950s and 60s in his magnum opus of Keynes at Harvard. But we live in an information age. Most of us have smartphones and are constantly connected to the internet 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. That means it is easier now than ever to read and find the truth. But we have to avoid the pitfall of just reading our side, just reading the narrative that we agree with. Read both sides, because we're going to get the extremes. Do what Alexis de Tocqueville said the American people always did, and that is why a free press is such a blessing to the land of the free and the home of the brave. That is, read both extremes and find the truth in the middle. Because again, the light of truth always has a way of shining through. It always has a way of piercing this web of deceit and this subterfuge that has been cast out in order to bamboozle the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, we the people. Again, that is our duty, obligation, but above all, responsibility in our individual capacity as ultimate sovereigns. But again, I want to focus a little bit on what Bill O'Reilly came out and said yesterday. He made an appearance, I believe it was on the Blaze Network. Yes, it was the Blaze Network that he made his appearance on, in which he said that Sean Hannity was right in handling his detractors and naysayers in the form and fashion that he did, and that Bill is now admitting that he wished he had taken that stance. And I found this to be rather interesting, because I would have thought an egoist such as Bill O'Reilly would have taken that kind of a stance. Recall that the settlement that he was forced to enter into based on these allegations of sexual harassment was quite high, and it was not the first time that this had happened during his meteoric rise there at the Fox News channel. And therefore, again, this is something that just cannot be ignored. It's something that has to be taken into consideration as we examine the totality of the circumstances in an objective fashion. But again, what we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, have always said is that we don't expect you to take our word for it, that we don't want you to just take this at face value, that we want you to look into this for yourself. And that's certainly something that we've always held to be the case, because, again, what we want for you is to be able to find the truth for yourself. We want you, our cherished listening passengers and audience members, to be empowered. That matters. It truly matters. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and cue this up, and then we will discuss it in greater detail after. So here we go. I'm going to go ahead and do this right now.
That is true. Everybody needs an editor. Let's talk a little bit about your removal from Fox. You recently described it as a far-left hit job. I listened to your interview with Dom DiGiorno. It's all linked perhaps to anti-Trump activities. Do you have any new information on this front?
We have a lot of information, John, but I can't. My lawyers are like begging me not to say anything, because we're going to drop it in the next few weeks, and it's really, really stunning how organized that was and what these people did. But I can't really. I want to let the legal people handle this. I do believe there will be litigation, so I'm going to let them take the lead, and then after it's out, then I'll comment further on it. But this was no accident that our sponsors were attacked. It was no accident that people came out who I've never even seen, and said vile things. This was very well organized. I tried it with Hannity. Hannity actually fought back. I didn't. I should have.
Do you think if you fought back harder, Bill, you'd still be on TV today?
I don't know. But I for reasons that I cannot explain now, I did not. All right? Because we knew it was bogus. We knew the whole thing was garbage. And, in hindsight, Sean did it the right way. And I should have done it that way, but I didn't.
Do you think?
Okay. So I can see where he's coming from on that. Yes, it's as I mentioned at the opening of the program, we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, have certainly covered these attempts to bamboozle the truth, to attempt to go after people, to engage in character assassination. That is certainly the hallmark of the left. But it's a symptom that we see that is plaguing the upper echelons of our federal government and the so-called right-wing punditry and commensurate at nearly all levels, and that is that in many ways they have created these problems for themselves. You create an opening for those dishonest members of the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist side of the American system of polity when you do not hold yourself to a high standard of morality. And again, I think what this perfectly encapsulates, what it perfectly demonstrates, for lack of a better term, is the warning that Sam Adams had, that if you don't act as a virtuous people, if you do not live by a high standard of morality, that this stuff is going to come back and haunt you, that it is essentially empowering your enemies to come forth and destroy you. Unfortunately, the so-called agents of tolerance, those social justice warriors that go forth under the erroneous banner of diversity and inclusiveness, they're destructive. Everything they do is about destruction. Look at the way they go after Confederate monuments, just as ISIS goes after historical religious monuments throughout the Middle East. Look at the way that they attempt to tell us that we can't say certain things, that we can't do certain things, and if we don't, provide to those who are engaging in something that goes against our deeply held religious beliefs, then we shouldn't be able to do our business. This is totalitarianism. This is hucksterism at its worst. This is the type of maniacal system that truly has no place in an open, honest, but above all free society like that of the United States of America. And unfortunately, it has come to the epicenter time and again. Yet the crux of the issue here is that Bill O'Reilly opened himself to this. And yes, he should have fought back. If you are innocent, then yes, you fight back. And yes, there should be a presumption of innocence in the United States. That's certainly the way the Constitution has applied these things. But the court of public opinion has been dominated by the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists for decades. For generation after successive generation, the detente wing of the gutless opposition party, or GOP, has gone forth with a live and let live attitude. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, that is exactly what detente means. It traces itself back to that whole notion of mutually assured destruction, where we thought we would just have to accept a world with Soviet communism in it. But we saw that wasn't the case. When we referred to the Soviet Union as the empire of evil, and when we fought for our rights, when we fought for our existence, and when we fought for our standard of life, quality of life, but above all, our system of polity, that's when we succeeded. That is when the American ideal was thriving. That is what it takes to rekindle American prosperity in the heart of the land of the free and the home of the brave. But we aren't doing that. We already have pointed out the fact that the 45th president of these United States has stated before, when it came to the defining of American exceptionalism, that he didn't like the term, that he didn't think it was a fair term, that it was a bad term. Again, it was something that made no sense to me. And it just adds to the cornucopia of issues that we are facing both as a nation and people. Something that is not going to go away, something that has been here for all this time, and again, it just doesn't want to go away. And it won't go away as long as we keep letting people run ramshon on us, or when we accept things that aren't true for what they are. And again, I think it's important that we let you hear this from the lips of the man himself again, just so we have that reminder. And again, I'll tie this all in after the clip. So here we go.
Define American exceptionalism. Does American exceptionalism still exist? And what do we do to grow American exceptionalism?
Okay, well, I don't like the term. I'll be honest with you. And people will say, oh, he's not patriotic. Look, if I'm a Russian, or if I'm a German, or if I'm a person we do business with, why, I don't think it's a very nice term. We're exceptional. You're not. First of all, Germany's eating our lunch. So they say, why are you exceptional? We're doing a lot better than you. I never liked the term. And perhaps that's because I don't have a very big ego and I don't need terms like that. But honestly, when you're doing business, I watch Obama every once in a while say American exceptionalism. I don't like the term because we're dealing, first of all, I want to take everything back from the world that we've given them. We've given them so much. On top of taking it back, I don't want to say we're exceptional. We're more exceptional. Essentially, you're saying we're more outstanding than you. By the way, you've been eating our lunch for the last 20 years, but we're more exceptional than you. I don't like the term. I never liked it. When I see these politicians get up with the American exceptionalism, then we're dying. We owe 18 trillion in debt. I'd like to make us exceptional, and I'd like to talk later instead of now. Does that make any sense?
That's good. Oh,
because I think you're insulting the world. And Jim, if you're German, or if you're from Japan, or you're from China, you don't want to have people saying that.
Right.
I never like the expression. And I see a lot of good patriots get up and talk about America. You can think it, but I don't think we should say it. We may have a chance to say it in the not too distant future, but even then I wouldn't say it. Because when I take back the jobs and when I take back all that money and we get all our stuff, I don't want to rub it in. Let's not rub it in. Let's not rub it in. But I never liked that term. Okay.
That is ridiculous. That is clearly ridiculous. First of all, what that shows me, beyond a shadow of the doubt, is that Trump doesn't really understand what the term American exceptionalism means. American exceptionalism, ladies and gentlemen, actually speaks to the formation of the United States. It's that we were based on an exceptional notion, this notion that we are a free nation and people, that sovereignty is rooted in the American citizenry. That was revolutionary. That is exceptional. That was something that 237 years ago had not been attempted by any of the great powers. Our founding fathers took a risk. They gambled. And it is a gamble that has paid off because, as I have mentioned so often on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, we have the longest standing constitutionally endowed federalist representative republic throughout the entire course of human events. That means all throughout world history, there has never been a more free, stable, secure, or steady republic or governmental system ever. No other nation has done what we did. And yes, folks, that is exceptional. But you see, he kept saying that, well, it's not very nice. Russia is eating our lunch, and that's why I have to go and pretend that I'm good buddies with Putin, but then deny it and have problems like this. No. This sort of chicanery is the very sort of thing that is the type of obfuscation that Zygmunt Dobbs warned about back in the 1950s and 60s, where they would use fluff terms, where they would attempt to play the dark and twisted game of semantics to change traditionally recognized definitions in order to spin the narrative to fit their web of deceit. This intellectually disingenuous drivel that was thrust out there by then presidential candidate, now President Donald J. Trump, is something that it still bothers me. Now, again, I must reemphasize the point that we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, do not want the president to fail, because that means that we would be championing the notion of the entirety of the land of the free and the home of the brave failing. That's the last thing we want. And sure, he said, hopefully at some point in the near future, we could say America was exceptional again. But here's the deal. That goes right in line with why my first officer, Jeremy Graventon, and I always had a problem with that shallow, hollow, empty, and utterly meaningless platitude that was the campaign slogan of Donald Trump all throughout the 2016 presidential election cycle, that of Make America Great Again. It presupposes that America ever once stopped being great. And again, what is it that made America great in the first place? It is the supreme law of the land, which, pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2, what is known in the common American vernacular as the Supremacy Clause, is none other than our shared United States Constitution. Our Constitution is the supreme law of the land. And we in these United States of America choose to unify and unite around not a culture, not a language, not any type of customs other than those that arise out of and from and through the supreme law of the land. We choose to unite around a law, a system of law. That's why I love that old adage that the United States of America is a nation of laws and not of men, that we do not selectively enforce the law, that it applies equally across the board. That is the goal that we have. That's certainly the theory that should be put into practice, but for generation after successive generation, both sides of the political aisle have been attempting to carve out a special niche for themselves so that they don't have to follow that axiom. And that is when you start to have the sort of rank and rampant corruption that has been plaguing the upper echelons of our federal government. That's when you have these nameless, faceless, and ultimately unaccountable bureaucrats that form the heart of this leviathan and out-of-control administrative state, using overzealous and draconian rules and regulations to snuff out the lifeblood of this country in our small business sector and in private business. All of that relates around this notion that the government is some sort of an end-all, be-all solution for the cornucopia and plethora of issues and problems that face us both as a nation and people. But when we look back again to the way that our founding fathers intended for this nation to run, dating back to its inception some 237 plus years ago, we see that our founding fathers viewed government as nothing more and nothing short of a necessary evil. They didn't want the government to have carte blanche to act in a unilateral fashion. They expected the body politique, in other words, the American citizens, to hold their officials accountable for their words, deeds, and actions. Again, this is why we must be a self-determinate people. And the amazing thing is that our founding fathers handed us the tools to accomplish all of that. They handed us that in the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. And again, this is why, going back to our premiere episode of September 11th of 2015, we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, have said that the key has been with us since the start of our nation. The key to unlocking the chains and shackles of governmental tyranny, servitude, and bondage, as well as despotism, but above all, oppression, can be found in the Constitution. For you see, the Constitution defines us as a nation. It mandates the proper scope and application as well as function of the federal government, and it dictates the interrelationship between the central government and the respective governments of the several states, the true tenets of federalism. But we've gotten away from that. Both sides of the political spectrum are pushing for this leviathan of an administrative state, and they see no reason to back away from it. They believe we are useful idiots, just as Joseph Stalin referred to the Soviet people that he dominated as just someone to throw breadcrumbs to an election cycle after successive election cycle, but never really standing up for their hopes, dreams, and, dare I say, future aspirations. It's always about their dark and twisted machinations. And the left has the ability to march lockstep. They are nefarious. They are cold, calculating, shrewd, and if nothing else, they are damn well meticulous. Their plan has been in the works for over a century and a half now, folks. And again, it shows no signs of slowing within the foreseeable future. Again, they believe they see a light at the end of the tunnel and that means that their victory is within grasp. And if we, in our capacity as United States citizens, don't begin taking a principled stand, being ready, willing, and able to stand shoulder to shoulder in solidarity and unity and put our collective foot down and say enough is enough, then yes, these dark and twisted foes of freedom and liberty will be successful. This will be the culmination of their meticulous and incessant efforts over the past 150 plus years. This is why it is so imperative that each and every one of us, as United States citizens, as popular sovereigns in the land of the free and the home of the brave, foster a fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our shared United States Constitution and thereby our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. As soon as we do that, and as soon as we have the ability to be empowered to let our voices be heard, because if you recall, one of the things of the First Amendment, the least utilized and understood, is that we have the right to petition the government for a redress of grievances, then there is no force on earth big enough to stop us. There is no force on earth that is big enough to impede the steady march of liberty, the steady push to secure the blessings of liberty unto ourselves and unto our posterity. In other words, for the up-and-coming generations, and indeed those generations which have yet to be born. But do we believe that anymore? We're certainly not hearing that in any of the media sources, but again, that's because they have their own ulterior motives, their own propagandist narrative and agenda that they are attempting to cram down the throats of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic without our say-so, and certainly completely against our will. That is one of the harsh realities that we must address. And we see that as the cult of personality replaces the old adage that the United States is a nation of laws and not of men, when we become a nation of men and not of laws, that's when you start having the sort of raw, emotional sensationalism that has come to dominate modern American politics. And why? Why does it come down to this? It comes down to this because, again, as that sagacious founding father Sam Adams said, if we want the United States to be a strong, vibrant, and robust representative republic, we must be a virtuous people. Sure, that may sound abstract on the surface upon a cursory glance, but it goes right to the heart of the problems we're facing. Almost all of this can be directly connected with those twin cancerous doctrines and notions of political correctness and moral relativism. That's the reason why we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, have declared total war upon these doctrines. The moral blight that is plaguing our republic is threatening to teeter this nation over the edge, plunging it into the abyss, placing us in a precarious, untenable, as well as unsustainable situation. And again, as we recall, the opening lines to the preamble to our shared United States Constitution states in no uncertain terms exactly who it is that owns this government, exactly who it is that owns the Constitution, exactly who it is that is in charge. It didn't start with the lines, "we the government," or "we the politicians," or "we the nameless, faceless, and ultimately unaccountable bureaucrats," or "we the press." No, it said, "we the people." This nation, ladies and gentlemen, it belongs to you, it belongs to me, it belongs to Jeremy, it belongs to Nelson, it belongs to all of us in our capacity as United States citizens, whether we be natural born or naturalized. That is what we have to get back to. That is why I say that when we stop and think about it, under the totality of the circumstances, and certainly with a modicum of objectivity, we begin to realize that we are more powerful than we give ourselves credit for. And it comes as no shock and no surprise to me that so many within the body politique of this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours don't realize the power they have. It is because for generation after successive generations, with the rise of John Dewey's education system and the domination of our information news sources and outlets by the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media, we no longer have heard, nor have we learned, what our duties, obligations, but above all responsibilities are as United States citizens. Now, folks, that is something we're going to have to combat. That is something that is going to take a diligent effort and a concerted effort on our part to ensure that we maintain our rights and that we maintain our free system of government. I fully realize that this is far easier said than done. And I know that it is exceedingly difficult in this fast-paced modern society in which we live today. But recall again that great visionary Zygmunt Dobbs, in his magnum opus of Keynes at Harvard, stated that this is what the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists were banking on. They were banking on us being distracted by being overwhelmed by this leviathan of an administrative state that the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists have championed for over a century and a half now. You know, again, it goes back to Cloward and Piven. Recall that Cloward and Piven were those two egghead academicians out of Columbia University who were at the same time as Zygmunt Dobbs. They wanted to create or establish a permanent entitlement state in the United States. Of course, we already had entitlement programs created by that frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist FDR. And then with LBJ's Great Society, there was a push to have even more social spending, even more social control of the facets of our daily lives. But their thought was, if they overwhelmed it, if they would take something that government created and make it unworkable, make it to where it was having a disparate and detrimental impact on the facets of the daily lives of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in these United States of America, we the people, then we the people would turn to the government on bended knee, begging the government to come in and solve a crisis that government created in the first place. Remember, Kat Sunstein was the one who said it best for the left. That activist and frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist Kat Sunstein literally said, "Never let a crisis go to waste." Well, that's what it means. That is what they were going towards here. That is their modus operandi. That is what they have been pushing for in generation after successive generation. And again, it shows no signs of improving within the foreseeable future. And as a result, we see a state of hysteria just take root in the heart of the land of the free and the home of the brave. Both sides are at a fever pitch. And it's because the tried and true, albeit threadbare tactic and strategy of divide and conquer has been utilized against us. All of the subterfuge that has been thrown out there, all of the red meat that has been thrown out there has worked. And it has worked to our great detriment each and every time. They are threatening to undermine our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. And as the father of our Constitution, James Madison, so aptly said, and I'm going to paraphrase him here, it won't be through one fell swoop or swift action that we lose our rights. Rather, it is through gradual, incessant, and incremental abridgment and usurpations that at one point in our nation's relatively brief yet illustrious history here on the face of God's green earth, we are going to awaken in a nation and no longer recognize it. This is what they're banking on, folks. This is what they have been pushing for decades, for generations. And the only way to put an end to it, the only way to really get this nation back to a modicum of sanity, back into a tenable position in which we rekindle American prosperity, is to go back to strict adherence to the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution at all levels of government. Yet, when we look at the two mainstay political parties in the modern system of American polity, neither one of them are championing that. They hardly even pay lip service to the Constitution anymore. It's because they view the government as a way to keep the gravy train rolling. They view it as a way to make money off of us. And yes, that is a parasitic relationship. They are draining the lifeblood out of the body politique of this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours. It's disgusting. It's truly disheartening. It is what has come to the forefront and the epicenter time and again without any end in sight. But what it really does, because as I mentioned, it does bring up this sort of raw hysteria, this sort of ridiculousness. It's that they go after everyone who doesn't agree with them. And it's interesting. There was a play, and this comes out of the Wright Scoop. It was published today at 8:42 a.m., today being June 12th of 2017, by the way. It says, video, New York production company murders, quote, Trump, close quote, on stage, major sponsors pull out. Now, folks, one of the things that I want to bring up here is, you remember that rodeo clown that had worn a Barack Hussein Obama mask? And he was banned from the rodeo for life because that was bad. And then remember there was that crazy lady that had lost her job at CNN because she held up the severed head of Trump. Well, that sort of thing with the severed head, the killing, the murder, that sort of thing, yeah, that's in ill taste. The mask worn by the rodeo clown, maybe that was in ill taste too, but he certainly wasn't calling for the death of Obama. The left is always among the first to try and destroy people, to try and engage in character assassination in order to shut down those points of view that disagree with them. But when it comes to them, that's when they cry the First Amendment. In my mind, these people should be punished by the free market. If people don't want to see that, then don't go. Or don't watch. You see, the entire impetus of our freedom of speech or freedom of expression is not to protect average speech, although it does. It's to protect that speech which is patently offensive. Because that's usually the type of speech that is speaking out against the dark and twisted machinations of a rogue, tyrannical, and ultimately illegitimate federal government. And yes, it was Kathy Griffin who was the one that did the beheaded betrayal of Trump. I had just forgotten her name, but I'm glad that it was here. There's a New York production company that's actually killing Trump on stage, but it's not going as well as they had hoped, according to the Wright scoop. 2 major companies have pulled funding. According to Fox, Delta Airlines and Bank of America are the first companies announcing they are pulling their sponsorship of this Manhattan-based theater company's portrayal of Julius Caesar as a Donald Trump lookalike in a business suit who gets stabbed to death on stage. Now, folks, that's kind of funny because we've always referred to Donald Trump as Donaldos or Donaldoff Julius Caesar Trumpolini. But here we go. It goes to say, no matter what your political stance may be, the graphic staging of Julius Caesar at this summer's Free Shakespeare in the Park does not reflect Delta Airlines' values, Delta said. Their artistic and creative direction crossed the line on the standards of good taste. Now remember again, this is perfectly fine, although I'm not sure that sponsors should necessarily try and control a narrative based on political correctness. I'm trying to be as objective here as I possibly can. It's okay for the sponsors to pull it, but it should not be utilized in a way that is censorship, or where the government comes in and does it, or the way that they do it when it's not proven to be the case, or when there is still an investigation going, as in O'Reilly's case. And don't get me wrong, I am not a fan of Bill O'Reilly. I make no pretense about the dislike of the man that I have. But, you know, you've got to be consistent with the way you apply things. Otherwise, you lose the whole crux of why we have the First Amendment in the first place. You lose that connection with what makes things operate properly in the land of the free and the home of the brave. It then goes on. Bank of America added it was withdrawing funding for the production, stating the public theater chose to present Julius Caesar in such a way that was intended to provoke and offend. The bank said in a tweet, had this intention been made known to us, we would have decided not to sponsor it. Of course, performances at Central Park's Delacorte Theater started back in May. And this was just days before Kathy Griffin had been condemned for posing with a bloodied rendering of Trump's severed head for a photograph. But it's interesting to note, CNN has Fareed Zakaria, Fareed Zakaria is one of their people, who said on Twitter, if you're in New York City, go see Julius Caesar, free in Central Park, brilliantly interpreted for Trump era, a masterpiece. Why? What the hell? This doesn't make sense. Again, it speaks to this double standard that has been at the heart of the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists and their allies in the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media for generation after successive generation now. Again, it's as I've stated all throughout this episode, and as we have oft times reiterated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, it's that we have to be accountable for our words, deeds, and actions. And it means that we have to be virtuous again. But the sick thing is, folks, there really is a video of this. And so I'm going to try and bring this clip up so that we can then discuss it in further detail after it's done. Because I think, again, it's important that you see this for yourself and not just take my word for it at face value. So I'm going to go ahead and cue this up now.
It's an actor dressed to look just like President Donald Trump as he's assassinated on stage. Look as his character is stabbed to death. And there's no mistaking the Trump connection. Check out the unbuttoned overcoat and red tie that hangs over his waist. It's a staging of Shakespeare's Julius Caesar that is outraging many.
The controversial production is taking place here in New York City's Central Park. The staging is being seen as a direct jab at Trump and the controversial political climate in this country.
There are other similarities to Trump. Caesar's wife, Calpurnia, bears a resemblance to First Lady Melania.
Big hands for me!
This is how the assassination scene has usually been done. Julius Caesar repeatedly stabbed by the members of the Roman Senate. In the new version, you see a bloodied Caesar, his white dress shirt soaked in blood. There was mixed reaction about this new twist.
I didn't like that they made this person who looks like Trump get assassinated. It's not a good message.
I don't think it's disrespectful for the president to be murdered on stage. It's not really the president's theater. Everybody knows it's theater.
This all comes on the heels of that outrageous image of Kathy Griffin holding the severed head made to look like Trump. She cried during a news conference where she was both defiant and apologetic.
That apology absolutely stands. I feel horrible.
As the cast took its bow, the audience applauded with a standing ovation. No word from the White House on the controversial production.
So basically, folks, what all of this comes down to is there is this sort of just insanity that has gripped the hearts, souls, and minds of our popular culture, of entertainment. And again, when you follow those twin cancerous doctrines and notions of political correctness and moral relativism, it means that you have a situational morality. That means that you don't believe that there is something written in concrete, thereby creating a line of demarcation or differentiation or distinguishment between that which is clearly right and that which is clearly wrong. And so, of course, you're going to have this sort of offensive thing. But at the same time, we don't have the right to be free from offense. But what we can do is act in a way that says we don't go to those things. Now, the fact that this is on government property, that it is done with, I'm assuming, partly from the endowment of the arts, we'll just say for argument's purposes here, or for a hypothetical situation here, that is how it is handled. And the reason that I go on that line and speak to that issue is because we all know that they've been trying to tear down the Confederate flag and Confederate monuments on public properties because it is a message that is disgusting, that is designed, as they claim, and I think rather erroneously claim, to put up a divisive and offensive narrative. Well, certainly it could be argued that that was what was happening in that depiction of Julius Caesar as Donald Trump. It's certainly not a wise way to depict it. But it's par for the course with the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists. It's do as I say, not as I do. I'm not going to say stop the production, but I'm not going to encourage people to go to it, and I'm fine with the businesses pulling their sponsorship of it. But it's high time that we here in the land of the free and the home of the brave start applying these things equally. That we stop engaging in the tried and true, albeit threadbare tactic and strategy of divide and conquer, which only allows these nefarious groups and organizations to further undermine our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. You see, that's what it comes down to. Why is it that no one's talking about creating something? If Delta and Bank of America didn't like that production, why didn't they go find a way to promote another type of theater that would put it in its traditional form? Instead of just saying we're going to yank the funding as if that somehow makes it okay, why not be proactive in challenging it? You see, a niche is created. The way the free market should handle this is to provide a superior alternative. Is that not what competition is about? But you see, the cronyism that exists today, that dominates our economics, that dominates our modern system of polity, it's not based on creativity. It's based on destruction. And the reason that destruction has run supreme and has run rampant is because of the twin cancerous doctrines and notions of political correctness and moral relativism, situational morality. And again, when Kathy Griffin gave her apology, I thought it was sincere. But remember that if it had been a right-winger, like with that Obama mask-clad rodeo clown, the left would not have accepted their apology. But you see, folks, I don't want to take the low road. I don't want to be the same as the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist, because I believe, as our founding fathers did, that the whole of this nation is far greater than the mere sum of its parts. That we are based on the natural order of things, or the natural law tenets, that are just as applicable by their nature today as they were at the inception of this nation some 237 plus years ago, as God willing and through our own diligent efforts, it will be some 237 plus years from today. But again, it is going to require that we stop looking towards, selectively applying the supreme law of the land, selectively applying outrage. Again, I'm reminded of that old adage of what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Why don't we get back to that? Why don't we commit ourselves to the natural law? You see, the natural law is inscribed on each of our hearts by our Creator. It's something that can be understood universally simply via the general application of human logic and reasoning. That is such a powerful thing. That's part of the reason why our constitutionally endowed Federalist Representative Republic is the longest standing of its type in contiguous fashion, meaning in uninterrupted fashion, throughout the entire course of human events. Again, it speaks volumes about the near infinite wisdom and foresight, as well as sagacity of our founding fathers. And when we live in an era where we turn our backs on that, embracing something that is designed to divide and conquer us, to bamboozle and to obfuscate the truth from us with all of this deluge of subterfuge, that is why we find ourselves in a weakened position. That is why we find ourselves turning to the government on bended knee. This is Cloward and Piven all over again. But folks, we can overcome this. It just requires a little bit of diligence on our part. It just requires that we foster that fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our shared United States Constitution, and thereby our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. Yes, it requires a modicum of vigilance on our part. But I'm reminded of yet another old adage, that nothing in life worth having ever comes easily. The American people have never been ones that have been defined by a give up immediately attitude. We have been rugged individualists right from the start. We have stared down what were seemingly impossible odds to overcome it each and every time. That speaks to our great character. That speaks to our great heritage. That speaks to our strength, both as a nation and people. And when we realize that, that is when we become unstoppable. That is when we are able to overcome all of this. And I think, if anything, what this crap there at the Central Park Free Shakespeare does is it shows how the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists infiltrate the information, not just information, rather entertainment is what I'm trying to get at here, folks, the popular culture. That way they control the message that reaches the up-and-coming generations. They slant the diatribe to fit a particular narrative and agenda. And they don't care whether it's connected to the truth or not. That has always been their approach. It's not realistic. It's rawly emotional. And if you recall, one of the things that we have repeated over and over again on previous episodes of our state-of-the-art radio program here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, is that we cannot afford to allow ourselves to continue to be plunged into the depths of hysteria and raw emotionalism. And we say that because it allows us to be easily manipulated. It allows us to become putty in the hands of the tyrants and wannabe potentates that are attempting to undermine all that we cherish, our time-honored values, institutions, and traditions here in the land of the free and the home of the brave. You start small and keep incrementally pushing to where you send ripples and shockwaves through the societal fabric of these United States of America, thereby allowing yourselves to be entrenched in society. This is why there is this hyper-partisan atmosphere and political climate in the modern American system of polity. It's because that has been their end goal. That has been their modus operandi for over a century and a half. And it's ridiculous. Yes, it's truly disgusting. It's not something that is laudable. And when we see the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists complaining about Confederate monuments being kept up by taxpayer dollars, why do they not come out in equal force and condemn this? Why? Because that would be against the propagandist narrative and agenda that they have been propping up. You see, they always selectively use things. It's as Roger Nash Baldwin, one of the co-founders of the American Civil Liberties Union, or ACLU, stated, we have to use the Constitution in order to destroy the Constitution. That is what their dark and twisted machinations are all about. That is what their modus operandi is all about. And they are very Machiavellian when it comes to their approach to achieving their end goals. Remember that Niccolo Machiavelli, in his magnum opus, The Prince, wrote that the ends justify the means. And that's certainly the way that these frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists approach their ideology. It's why they never back down. It is why they politicize every facet of their daily life. And they expect us to acquiesce. This is where the danger of a tyranny of a minority begins to bubble up to the surface. The squeaky wheel gets the oil. And that might work in a democracy. In fact, that is certainly one of the shortcomings of a direct democracy. And that is why our founding fathers made damn sure that we are not a democracy. And if anyone tries to tell you differently, tell them to explain that via Article 4 and Clause 4 of the Constitution. Article 4, Clause 4, the United States Constitution is a very unique thing. Article 4, Section 4 really states, the United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a republican form of government, and shall protect each of them against invasion and on application of the legislature or of the executive when the legislature cannot be convened against domestic violence. Okay. We see that It guarantees to all of the states, all of the several states, a republican form of government. So what is republic or republican? Well, a republic as a noun is a state in which supreme power is held by the people via their elected representatives and which has an elected or nominated president rather than a monarch. Whereas a democracy is more like a mobocracy. A democracy is a noun, which is a system of government by the whole population or all eligible members of a state, typically through elected representatives. Now, it's easy to see how that can be confusing. But in a republic, the control is by the representatives, whereas in a democracy, it is controlled by a majority or a very vocal minority. Remember, again, a wolf or two wolves and a lamb voting for what's for lunch. That lamb will lose out each and every time. But at the same time, the lamb certainly cannot vote it to where they are claiming to be an insular and discrete minority and that we need positive discrimination because of past infringements upon the rights of lambs, so that the wolves never are allowed to eat. That is what is known as a tyranny of the minority. You see, folks, we are a republic for a reason. Our founding fathers, in their near infinite wisdom and foresight, and dare I say sagacity, realized that the only way to ensure that the people are free, as that great founding father George Mason had determined, that we are all endowed by our Creator with fundamental rights and inalienable rights. And he discovered this when he was called upon to help write the Declaration of Rights for the state of Virginia that became the impetus of the Bill of Rights, or first 10 amendments to our shared United States Constitution. The only way to protect that is via a republican form of government. That's why Article 4, Section 4 states that we must have a guarantee to all of the several states in their quasi-sovereign status of a republican form of government. Does anyone even discuss this anymore? Does anyone even define this anymore? Do they even teach Article 4, Section 4 in general civics classes anymore? Well, I hate to break it to you, but the historical revisionists and the Common Core standard bearers of education that have infiltrated and infest our ivory towers of academia from coast to coast and border to border in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours are no longer teaching it. Our up-and-coming generations have no idea the true purpose of a republic, or even that that is what our government is and has been since the inception of this nation some 237 plus years ago. Again, this is that dark and twisted game of semantics being played over and over again, and we are seeing the deleterious and detrimental ramifications directly arising therefrom. Again, folks, there is but one way to overcome all of this. There is but one practicable and real-world solution that will bring us back from the edge of the abyss and place us squarely on the path to prosperity once again. And that is, first and foremost, fostering that fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our shared United States Constitution, and thereby our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights, and thus allowing us to stand shoulder to shoulder in solidarity and unity and to demand in a collective voice, not collectivist, but as citizens, that we return to strict adherence to the clear and concise language of our Constitution at all levels of government, from the municipal and local to the county, from the county to the state, and from the state to the limited federal government. Then and only then can we truly begin to set ourselves free from the chains and shackles of governmental servitude, bondage, tyranny, but above all, oppression. We hold the key to preventing despotism from taking root in the heart of the land of the free and the home of the brave. That's why we have to stand together. Now, with that said, it is time for us to go ahead and begin our descent. I'm going to send the flight attendant back with one last round of alcohol. Folks, if she attempts to stab you, instead of pouring alcohol, just push her out of the plane. She is mostly harmless. As always, folks, I'm your Captain, Randy Wright, and I want to thank you for tuning in to the Wright Flyer. Should you have any questions, comments, concerns, or even topic suggestions, I invite you to leave them either in the comment section here on our YouTube page or on our Google Plus page or even on our Facebook page. And then, on top of this, I invite you to follow us over on Twitter with the Twitter handle at Radio Aviation EX. One more time, folks, that's at Radio Aviation EX. And there you will find the departure board that lists my personal Twitter account, as well as the personal Twitter account of my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton. You will find a link to the Blogspot account that is just chock full of useful information. And then, as you will find in the description section of today's program, you will find a link to the Cafe Press account. Folks, at the Cafe Press account, we have all sorts of trinkets, novelty items, and goodies, either with our original Radio Aviation Excellence logo on it, or our First Class Passenger logo on it, or even the two Uplifting America logos. And you'll find it on a plethora of products. Whether it be hats, shirts, shoes, neckties, watches, clocks, thermoses, mugs, drinking glasses, shot glasses for that last round of alcohol, notepads even, laptop sleeves and protectors, tote bags, smartphone sleeves and protectors. Oh, it's just a cornucopia of things there, folks, and all at reasonable prices. Thus, you simply cannot go wrong with the Cafe Press account. Folks, go ahead and take a gander at that and give us a little bit of support. Oh, and by the way, if you have not already done so, please feel free to subscribe. We welcome all subscribers here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer. After all, folks, we do this show for you, and we do it to empower you. And so go ahead and take a look at that so that we can support each other. Folks, as always, thank you again for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. We hope to see you again next time. Please do take care.